It accounts for nearly 90% of what moves people up the corporate ladder when IQ and technical skills are roughly similar. What is it and how do you get it? Find out on this episode of Healthy and Black. Hi, I'm Dr. Jarek Conrad. Welcome to Healthy and Black, where I share information about the state of health for Black America across 7 categories, from emotional health to physical health. I became plant-based over 15 years ago after losing so many of my family members to chronic health issues. Now I want to help you take control of your health. Okay, look, the way we live and work is unsustainable. Life is making it difficult at work, and work is making it difficult at life. We might be having financial challenges or family issues, health-related issues, just things are not going well. We're probably not going to be our best selves at work. On the other hand, about 89% of employees and 82% of C-suite executives experience some kind of work-related stress. Many report negative repercussions on their work, but also their personal life, their well-being, and their relationships. So something has got to change. This is not a sustainable, healthy way for us to live. So let's think about how we live and the pressures that we deal with. So I talk about too much, too fast, and too fake. We just get inundated with way too much information. The average person sees something like 4,000 to 10,000 ads a day. That's 4,000 to 10,000 ads where people are trying to get you to buy something, to do something. And on top of that, we know that so many people are using social media, and it's not just adolescents and young people that are challenged with social media. About 59% of adults who use social media regularly report some kind of impact to their mental health. And so again, too much information at our fingertips. We're overwhelmed, inundated with the information that we're getting, and it's fast. I mean, if something happens in some corner of the world, we know about it real time because of both regular media as well as social media. So there's really no time to process information. It's one thing after another. You know, it used to be a news cycle seemed like a week, then it became a few days, then it was a 24-hour news cycle, and now it just shifts from hour to hour. So a lot of information coming in, and it's a lot of it. And unfortunately, so much of it is fake news. And you all know the fake stuff is the juicy stuff. So fake news is spread 70% faster than actual factual information. And so again, just think about this. We're getting all this information. It's coming to us faster than it ever did, and we don't know how to process it. But we're struggling, and we're seeing the effects of those struggles, both at work and in our personal life. What is it about the way human beings process information that has led us to be struggling so much? Well, we haven't changed very much. We are very similar to who we were back in the early days on the African savannas. We're still those people. We have the same machinery that we had back then. As advanced as a society as we are, the remarkable inventions and innovations that we've had, the incredible discoveries and scientific breakthroughs that we've experienced, when you peel all of it back, we're still very much the same. We're driven by fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? We are experiencing some kind of challenge, some kind of threat. We fight it. We come at it with whatever we have. Sometimes we react instead of respond. We run. We do the calculations and say, look, I don't think I'm going to be successful in this. Let me live to fight another day. And let me live so that my species, my offspring can fight another day. So flight has been something that's been very necessary for human beings and survival. We freeze sometimes. The kids talked me into getting some rabbits. So we have a couple rabbits. And it's fascinating what the rabbits do. When they don't want to be bothered, you go and you start trying to talk with them and play with them. They kind of turn around and they'll freeze. And they're like, if I freeze, he doesn't see me and he won't mess with me. In many ways, human beings are like that. Sometimes our emotions just, they overtake us and we don't know what to do. And we have all these things that we say we would do in this situation. If that were me, I would do X. If that were me, I would do Y. But when you're in that situation and you were not expecting it, sometimes nothing comes out. Sometimes you freeze. Oh, we fall. Let me cozy up to this person that has posed this threat. Let me say good things about them. Let me try to make them feel good about themselves so I can neutralize them so they won't come after me. They won't be thinking about eating me, right? So that's who we are. We fight, we flight, we freeze, we fawn. So we are, when we're inundated with all these stresses, we are doing some version of one or multiple of those reactions at the same time. It's interesting that I do a lot of executive coaching. And I've had people say, I don't care what people think about me. The reality is, the research says that you do care. Furthermore, you probably should care to some degree because relationships are critically important. And this was in Harvard Women's Health Watch. A lack of strong relationships increased the risk of premature death by any cause by 50%. 50%. This is roughly equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes a day. So not having those relationships is a critical thing. I mean, obviously, we experienced a lot of that in the pandemic, and there are a lot of people that have yet to fully recover from the isolation of the pandemic. So relationships are critically important, but it's tough if we're always in this mode where we're perceiving threats everywhere, and very difficult to maintain a solid, healthy relationship when we're bouncing between fight and flight and fawn and freeze and, just always under siege. And we feel like we're under siege again because we're under so much stress. And when people are under a significant amount of stress or they have experienced some trauma, we roll into this defensive posture and we have some of those outcomes. So I think a key is emotional health. And specifically, I'll talk about emotional intelligence as kind of a measure of emotional health. Now, you've heard me in previous episodes mention emotional intelligence and how important I think it is. And I'll go into a little bit of background as to where that came from. We think that we are objective. We think that we are logical. We think that we are rational. But study after study demonstrates that we're not as rational as we think we are. We are good at rationalizing. I travel a lot for business and I go to a lot of conferences where I'm the keynote speaker and I see the spread. They bring out food. Oh, there may be 3,000 people at this conference. They have cruises to go on or weddings to go to or, whatever it is, they want to look good for reunions that they're going to go to. And so, they said they're going to be on this diet before the conference. So they come to the conference and again, they roll out, all this food because they're trying to keep you happy. So they're bringing at break time, they have snacks out there, cookies or cakes or whatever it might be. Let's say you're somebody who loves chocolate. You're on this diet, but you love chocolate. You go to this conference and during break time, there's some brownies. And I happen not to be a person who loves chocolate, but let's just go with this. You love chocolate and you see those brownies. So what happens in your brain is what I call when emotion and intellect collide. Your intellect says, can't have those brownies. Would blow through my calories for the week. I can't do it. I'm on this diet. Your emotions say, it smells good. I, yeah, what about a little bit? And then your intellect says, no, we can't have none. And they go back and forth. They're sparring. And unfortunately, the side that wins out most often in those battles is the emotional side. And we know that because we see the evidence of it in overweight, obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, blah, 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 blah. We give in to this battle. Emotions went out, and we like to feel good about our decisions. So later we're like, man, I really made a good decision to eat that brownie, because if I eat the brownie today, and then I'll go work out first thing in the morning, and then I'll skip dessert for 2 days, and then and you start calculating in your head of why this was a great decision, a rational decision. It was never a rational decision. It was an emotional decision. So emotions are powerful. The problem is, like so many things that we talk about in these 7 dimensions of health, emotional intelligence has gone down. In a 2023 report that looked at data from 2018 to 2022, that data showed a decrease on every single emotional intelligence competency. So we're not going the right direction as it relates to emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is going down. What's happening with IQ? Unfortunately, we're seeing the same trend. After going up on a pretty consistent basis, nearly 30 points over the past century, IQ scores as well have started to decrease, and they have been decreasing over a 13-year span. So emotional intelligence is going down, and raw IQ, what we think about as, typical generalized intelligence, is going down as well. So we're not going in the right direction. We need to fix this. Yeah, I mentioned I would tell you this story. Most of you know, if you've tuned into this podcast, that I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. A place I love, but a pretty challenging place to grow up. And as a very young person, I had questions about why some people were successful and why some people weren't. With all the negative publicity we get coming from East St. Louis, there are some stars, Jackie Joyner Kersee, Miles Davis. There are people who've grown up in East St. Louis and gone on to achieve remarkable success. And I always wondered, what separates those people? Like, what's the difference between the folks who, it might be smart, because a lot of smart people, and some of them don't make it. And then these other people, what is that? So when I left East St. Louis, went to University of Illinois for undergrad, went to Cornell for graduate school, later went to work on a doctorate degree. At each step, people would ask me, "You're from East St. Louis. How did you make it out?" I didn't have a good answer for them. I had the typical stuff, my mother, my family was very supportive. I worked hard. I did well in school. I had some responses, but I didn't feel too confident about those responses because I knew other people who had supportive families. I knew other people who did well in school. Somehow they made poor decisions, and they didn't become all that they could have been. So something else was going on. And then somewhere around, I don't know, 96, 97 or so, I stumbled on an article about emotional intelligence. I think it was a Daniel Goleman article, emotional intelligence. I read this article and said, man, this is it. I think this is what I have. So I took an assessment on emotional intelligence. I had above average emotional intelligence, and I've really been talking about it ever since. So almost 30 years now, I have always talked about how important I think emotional intelligence is. If it was a significant contributor for me and so many other people overcoming challenging circumstances to go on to achieve some level of success, I think about what people can do in organizations when they're not dealing with those kind of crises, when they're not trying to overcome particular traumas and all that kind of stuff. It is a key for resiliency and for success. And it's been demonstrated to be that across various job types, across various industries, across various types of people. So that's how I got really turned on to emotional intelligence. I remember going to my interview for my doctoral program, and I told them, listen, I want to be an expert in this stuff. And they're like, well, we can make that happen. And truthfully, over the next several years of coursework, all my papers were about some aspect of emotional intelligence. My dissertation was on emotional intelligence and really the relationship between emotional intelligence and intercultural sensitivity. I presented back then at various conferences, international conferences on emotional intelligence. I got invited to be a member of the consortium for research on emotional intelligence in organizations. We just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago where experts came and talked about some of the recent research in emotional intelligence. So this is something that's been very important to me. I know my kids are probably tired of hearing me talk about emotional intelligence and why it's so important for not only who they want to become professionally, but who they want to become as people. So let me talk about what EI is. So a technical definition comes from Salovey and Mayer, they really coined the term emotional intelligence. They describe it as the ability to monitor one's own and others' emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use the information to guide one's thinking and action. So the way I think about it is really in four categories. Um, I understand what's going on with me. I know how emotions are pushing me. I can tell when emotion and intellect, when that battle is going, and I understand when emotions are trying to prod me and push me in a certain way. The next stage is I can do something about that. The next stage is I can do something about that. So for those people who saw the brownie and they ended up eating it, the emotions got the best of them. For the people who saw the brownie, might have wanted it, but were able to somehow, redirect their attention, have a healthy snack instead, whatever they did to not succumb to the pressure of their brownie. That is the second phase of emotional intelligence. The third phase is I understand what's going on with you. I can read the room and I can sense that something's not quite right, or I can sense where you are from an emotional standpoint. And the final stage is I can do something with that information once I have an understanding of where you are. I can modify my behavior appropriately to kind of meet you where you are so we can go where we need to go together. There are various ways to measure emotional intelligence. If you want to know what tool is the best, it really depends on what you're trying to do. There are some self-report skills that look at how people think about their own emotional intelligence, how they would rate themselves. There are 360 instruments that look at how do other people rate my emotional intelligence. And then there are some, they call it the ability model, that, researchers will put you in a situation where there is a appropriate and less appropriate response, and they see how you do. And that is a measure of your emotional intelligence. So, either of those can be useful. It just depends on what you're trying to find out. I use an instrument that is called the EQI 2.0. That's what I'm certified in. It is the foundation for the coaching that I do. And I love it because when I look at the scales that make up that version of emotional intelligence, they all seem pretty practical. So there's a self-perception scale. So that self-perception scale includes things like self-regard. How do I feel about myself? Emotional self-awareness. So again, how aware am I of my emotions and how they're driving me? And self-actualization. Well, how do I feel about what I've accomplished, what I've achieved, kind of where I am in life? Do I feel good about who I am and what my contributions have been? That's the self-perception scale. There's a self-expression scale that looks at one's assertiveness. Am I the person who will sit back and I feel like saying something, but I just I don't have enough confidence to get it out. So I sit back and I go back later and say, man, I wish I would have said that. Or I saw somebody treating somebody in a way I thought was inappropriate, but I didn't say anything. I didn't assert myself in that situation. Self expression also includes independence. Am I, how much of a follower am I? Am I cult prone is what I call it? Or am I able to think based on, evidence and arrive at my own conclusions? Emotional expression. So not only am I able to pinpoint what my emotions are, but I'm able to articulate them. I can explain to you how I feel and why I feel the way I do. So that's self-expression. Then there's this interpersonal cluster. So that includes empathy, which most people, when they think about emotional intelligence, that empathy is probably the first thing that comes to mind. Now, keep in mind that empathy and sympathy are very different things. And emotional intelligence has got this kind of bad rap for being too touchy feely. Oh, it's emotional intelligence. We're gonna hug. We're gonna hold hands. That's not how I operate. For me, this is very much about brain science. There's a social responsibility piece in the interpersonal scale. So is it just about me or is it about other people? If I don't care about other people, I'm not very likely to connect well with them. And then there's the interpersonal relationships. So how strong are my relationships? How lasting are they? How deep are they? Unfortunately, it's ironic. We're in the social media age, social media, but in many ways, social media is making us antisocial. Why do I say that? The research suggests that if you compare us today to, back in the 1960s or so, we have fewer close friends. The research suggests that we have fewer one friend, two friend, three friend, even up to 10 or more friends. There are more people 60 years ago that would have said they have 10 or more friends than today when you got thousands of friends online. So it's really, really interesting that what is the definition of friend, I guess, in that case? What is the degree of the relationships that you have? You have maybe a lot of surface relationships, maybe way more surface relationships than we've ever had, but not as many deep relationships. Something to think about. There's a decision-making component of emotional intelligence. Decision-making includes impulse control. So that's that whole responding versus reacting thing. Then you have reality testing. How effectively am I able to read a situation and understand what's going on? How equipped am I to separate fact from fiction? How well do I understand what's real versus fake news, for instance? There's a problem solving part of decision making. So problem solving sounds pretty dry. It doesn't sound like emotional intelligence at all. The reality is problem solving is kind of a combination of all these things. I got to have some impulse control. I got to be independent. I need a lot of things to be able to solve problems effectively. But, empathy without problem solving, I don't know that it moves anything forward. And then the final component is stress management. So stress management includes optimism. Am I optimistic about the future or am I paranoid? Am I afraid or just really pessimistic because my emotions have overtaken me? Stress tolerance. So I talked about impulse control. What about your stress tolerance? How long a rope do you have before we get to that impulse control problem, right? How much does it take to get you to your point of where you're stressed out. It's interesting because some people have very little stress tolerance, but very high impulse control. So they get stressed out, but they're going to tear up anything when they get stressed out. Then other people have a lot of stress tolerance, but very little impulse control. Takes a lot to get them there. But once you get them there, you better watch out because they're coming hard. And then flexibility. How much am I able to adapt, to adjust to changing circumstances? Or am I so fixed in how something has to be done? That is a very important aspect of emotional intelligence. So you can see why I've been attracted to this. All of these things, whether you call them emotional intelligence or not, all these traits, all these attributes are really important for success, not only at work, but for success at home as well. So it's critically important that we spend some time thinking about this, especially since we see the trend is that these skills are going down. And they're more needed now than ever. Most organizational leaders will say that the quote unquote soft skills, those are the skills that separate the really high performers from the average performers. So let's think about this a little bit more. If we think about those 4 quadrants I talked about, the self-awareness and self-regulation, the social awareness and social regulation, what are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about? Well, from a self-awareness standpoint, do I know what my triggers are? What makes me feel a certain way at a given time? From an awareness of others standpoint, do I understand how my behavior affects other people? Do I know why they're responding the way they are to what I'm doing or what I'm saying? From an action standpoint, if I know what my triggers are, what am I doing about it? Am I doing things to redirect stuff before it gets to this point? Or do I understand, okay, here's one of my triggers. Let me not overreact to it. And then from an action as it relates to others standpoint, how well do you adjust your behavior? Do you continue to behave in ways that damage relationships? Or are you able to skillfully navigate relationships to the mutual benefit of you and that other party involved? So look, I want to leave you with this exercise. I want you to think about what makes you you. 2 or 3 things about you that capture the essence of who you are. I would suggest maybe one of those things is very positive, and maybe pick a couple things that are not so positive. This is the thing that I feel great about, that, is part of who I am. And here are the couple of things that I'm working on that I don't feel so great about. For each one of those things, where did it come from? Where did it come from? So we'll talk on a future episode about nature versus nurture. It's fascinating when you start to think about that, the kind of breakthrough that you could have by understanding how something early on in your life still affects you today. And you might not have been thinking about it on a conscious level, but at a subconscious level, it's been affecting you. So who are you? Where did that come from? So why are you, I guess, is the right question for that. And then this last question is, how are you? And what I mean by that is, what is the impact of each of those items on other people? What's the impact? And when you think about that, what about that equation do you want to change? What about that equation do you want to change? So that's your homework assignment. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning about the emotional edge. Until we meet again, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. Take care. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Healthy and Black. I'm your host, Dr. Jarek Conrad. If you have feedback on today's episode, please email info@jarekconrad.com. I love to hear from you. Don't forget to visit jarekconrad.com to subscribe to my blog. Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Until next time, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health.